Hi guys. Hi. All right. Okay, stop. Okay. Leaders in the digital age, an essential preparation. This shall be our topic for this session. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Shafiq and I will be your introducer for today's speaker. Now, coming up on stage later is an entrepreneur who has gone through the ups and downs of the business world. Now, allow me to mention some of his long list of achievements and contributions. To start off, he was the chairman of the New Entrepreneurs Foundation, MyNEF, and also the chairman of My Harapan. Next, he became the president of the Malaysian Association of Bumiputra ICT Industry and Entrepreneurs. On top of that, he was also the deputy chairman of the Global Innovation and Entrepreneurship Foundation, an advisory of the board member of the Malaysian SME Development Agency, and a board member of SME Corp. Back then, he was a Petronas scholar, and he started his career with Petronas Midco. And by the year of 2000, he started to embark on the journey of entrepreneurship with Asia Stream Group. And he co-founded a startup, named Juta, which garnered private investments of around 2.1 million US dollars. Everybody give a round of applause. In addition to that, he created Comic Excel, an accelerator for the creative industry, and introduced the Rice Bowl Startup Awards. And he recently curated Bahtera, Bumiputras of Tomorrow, an initiative by the Ministry of Finance. A passionate entrepreneur and driven to challenge the status quo for a positive impact, please welcome the CEO of Dato, Mr. Ashran, Dato Ghazi.
Afternoon, everyone. Voila. No sense of enthusiasm. Yayasan Khazanah folks were telling me that, you know what, the audience that we have today are really awesome. They're coming from all around the globe. But it doesn't sound like it, man. How's everyone this afternoon? Better, but I'm sure can be a lot better also moving on. I know it's probably been a long day for you guys. I'm sitting down. So let's try to also make this interactive a little bit more, yeah? So I've been given this topic to share with everyone this afternoon. But as opposed to waiting right at the end of the presentation and then we start going into Q&A, if somewhere in between, right, you guys feel that there's a burning question, just raise your hand, so that you catch my attention and just step up to the mic. Are we cool with that? All right. So Shafiq just now kind of read a little bit of my background, because just kind of summarizes that a little bit at the moment. As he mentioned just now, I've been involved a lot in entrepreneurship development space while being an entrepreneur myself. My last posting was with Magic, a government agency that was involved in developing startups. Early this year, I've joined as a partner and a CEO in a company called Dato, which is involved in consumer intelligence. So this is what I do right now, right? Just now, Christy was saying, you know, how consumers are volatile. There's a need to understand them and so forth. What we do at Dato right now is pretty much trying to make sure that we can help business owners, brand owners, understand consumers a lot better, yeah? but just to give a glimpse in terms of the perspective that we take before we get on to the primary topic of the afternoon. Our lens is pretty much this when we're trying to help brand owners or advertising agencies or companies to understand consumers. In most times, right, and especially for you guys that's doing your coursework and doing research, for instance, you would actually take, different industries and try to look for people that is directly impacted in that industry. So if you're in F&B business, you would look for certain demographics. That's the norm that is normally done. And you ask a whole bunch of questions to that group with a hope to get deeper insights from that person to do whatever they want to do. But we think this is very isolated. The thinking makes you to be very silo in terms of how you want to view things. So what we've done, we've kind of put the consumer right in the middle and study a consumer across multiple verticals. Pretty much what you wear, what you eat, what you like to do in your leisure time, or what kind of financial background that you have, what kind of property do you stay, and all those things. Pretty much things that impacts you as a person, right? Once you are able to do that from a singular person lens, right, we are able to then cross-tabulate information between one vertical to the next and discover better behavioral patterns. That's essentially what we do at Dato. But moving on, that's just to give a little bit of background in terms of what I'm doing right now, right? But for today, what I am hopeful to be able to share with you guys this afternoon, right, are some just key elements required to be a good leader in the digital age. And perhaps being able to kind of share some of the experiences that I have within the journey. But I'm hopeful also to be able to get questions or reactions or anything from any one of you guys on the floor here this afternoon. So let's start with this. Because the title says Leaders in Digital Age, and when I was looking at the agenda for today, right, everything has some leadership context to it. So I was Googling around and trying to also frame, when we talk about leadership, is there a difference between leadership as we all know it and leadership in the context of the digital age, supposedly, right? So I bump into this that says, you know what? Difference between working in an environment and a digital environment versus a traditional one. I mean, those are the things that's been listed there. Pace of business, culture, mindset, flexibility, and so forth. And the minute that, these are the environment that you are dealing with, the next question that comes to mind is then what are the skill sets that is required for you to be able to kind of shine truly within that environment itself. So I thought it was interesting that the study kind of looked at, you got to have a transformative vision, you got to be forward-looking, you got to understand technology, you got to be change-oriented, strong leadership, and other things that's a bit more generic, right? But when I looked at this, the key things that I want to kind of put across to everyone is knowing all those elements, right? Then what you got to be reflecting is whether, do you think within all those things that's been listed, would you categorize, how would you rank yourself? How would you categorize yourself within all those various skill sets that's been established there? Are you, right, ready to be a leader within the digital age, so to speak, in terms of needs? So even if you Google up, right, if you Google up leadership in the digital age or digital era, whatever that may be, you will have a whole bunch of literature. But I think when I was reviewing this list back, for the most part, I don't think it's any different leadership within what we are used to and supposedly leadership in the digital era. Anyone agrees or disagrees here or not? If you look at the list here, right, it almost sounds like, biasa lah. These are normal things that when you talk about leadership, you should have. A transformative vision, forward-looking, and so forth. But I think, if anything, if we were to like kind of drill down, in the current landscape that we're in, these are the two areas that I think that needs extra emphasis, perhaps comparatively to what we are probably used to. Yeah? Because other things is that, if you don't have those things, then I wouldn't categorize anyone in a leadership position or having a leadership type of persona, so to speak. Now, if we look at trying to understand technology, then, I was asking, what's the background of everyone here? And, to me, all of you guys over here are categorically digital native. Correct? Yes? Unsure? I would imagine that, 99% lah, if anything. All of you guys in this room are pretty much digital natives. And because of that, if you pretty much check list of traits that you have as a leader within that list just now, then theoretically, I think that you guys in this room, or even the peers, right, are very much so primed to be leaders within the digital age. I actually think that people that writes a lot of articles about leadership in the digital age are pretty much not digital natives. They are from the old school of blocks that's trying to make sense and meaning within the current environment and landscape that we're in. Now, taking this framing, right, what I kind of want to zoom down for everyone is trying to kind of look at the fact of how can you be more change-oriented, right? And the three keywords that comes to here, and even Christy mentioned this a little bit to some of your questions about creativity and so forth. Number one, you got to be open-minded, adaptable, and innovative. But these are also very big words, right? They're big words that we hear all the time that sometimes, if you ask me, loses its meaning also. Because every single speaker, every single Joe, lecturers, whoever they may be, are constantly using these words. So what I want to do today is not so much focus on these words itself, right? But walk through you guys three possible approaches, either independently or collectively, that you could actually apply for you to be better persons, leaders, and take on the task to be more change-oriented, so to speak. Okay? So number one, in order for you to be a little more change-oriented, one approach is to constantly redesign market boundaries. And when I talk about redesigning market boundaries here, it is pretty much always not accepting whatever that's given to you as is. And you would see some glimpse of that to some extent from what Christy was sharing just now. So that's approach number one, and I'll deep dive a little bit more after this. Approach number two, people talk about innovation all the time, right? Like I said, the word nowadays especially is being used constantly. So I added the word value innovation, and I'll also elaborate this a little bit because the thinking about value innovation is about reducing cost and increasing value. Because sometimes people think doing something differently is already innovation. Having a new idea, it's already innovation. Innovation only makes sense if you can actually create value out of it, which means if you're able to sell whatever it is that you're thinking of. Otherwise, they are just ideas, right? And I'll drill down also on this one. Approach number two is to look at constantly shifting to non-customers. This is regardless, so if you're moving on from where you are right now, going into organizations, leading teams, whether you're going to be going into companies that's focusing on a B2B environment, or even going into companies that is in a B2C environment, looking at the possibility of shifting to non-customers is always a perspective that you can take to look at driving the whole thought process towards betterment, towards thinking about new ways of doing things, towards capturing new untapped segments that is possible for the organization that you will be leading through across, right? So, in order, these three key approaches, and I say I'm narrowing it down very specifically because the other things sounds something that you'll probably pick up either throughout the day today or in other instances within your coursework. These three aspects, being change-oriented and owning it, will actually give that advantage to you as you join in the workforce, regardless of what level that you're at. Yeah. So let me take the first step when we talk about reimagining boundaries. I'll share the deck with the organizers later on, and they've got a version of it also to be shared with everyone. But this just pretty much just highlights ways of thinking in order for you to reimagine boundaries of anything that you're dealing with, right? Now, like Christy was saying just now in response to one of your questions, she was saying, can we train creativity? If somebody is not creative enough, can we cultivate that person to be more creative? Now, I used to run MAGIC, which stands for Malaysian Global Innovation and Creativity Center. And we do that as a living. And I believe that, while ingrained nature helps, but creativity can actually be nurtured because it is actually a guiding thought process towards you getting to that ideation that you want, towards you to getting the idea and thoughts that you want. So these are just ways of looking at things in terms of how would you redefine market boundaries itself that you are dealing with. I mentioned just now about value innovation. To do something different is relatively easy. But true value in innovation is the ability to be able to reduce cost and increase value from the eyes of your customers, right? And I loved, stuff that Christy was saying just now. So I was listening to what Christy was saying. It was all just pretty much contextualizing whatever that I've put up here. She spoke at the tail end just now about how she's got to continuously, her motto or philosophy, right, is, was it cheap, good, and pretty, or cheap, pretty, good. So those elements, right, when you talk about cheap from a cost structure point of view, is ensuring how can you reduce costs effectively. But at the same time, reducing costs and not creating the value, it means anyone can do that. But if you're able to achieve the combination of reducing cost and increasing value in whatever work and field that you're doing here, then you achieve true value innovation. Because it's not as easy for anyone to copy and replicate that. Otherwise, you may think that it's a cool new idea that you're going to do. The next Joe can possibly replicate that on their own. And last but not least, when you talk about leadership within the digital age, being able to look where people are not looking at, being able to kind of be agile enough also with regards to the volatility of market conditions. When we talk about non-customers itself, it is easy to say, somebody is selling A to a particular group, let's create another product and sell to that same group also. But when we talk about shifting to non-customers, if you notice there's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. This essentially is just a methodology of thought process. If you're designing a new product or a new service, and I saw was a lady just now was asking, what if you're looking about creating a new product or a service and so forth, right? Then you want to create a product or service that actually is able to cut across all the 3 tiers. Because then you'll be able to capture the most maximum potential of clients that you can out there. Also no different than what Christy was saying just now. I'm just now putting them into frameworks. I'm just now putting them into methodologies. for you to be able to see them through. Because current customers are basically, who you're normally dealing with and what everyone is dealing with. Tier 1 is soon-to-be customers. There are always customers out there that's on the fringe. Understanding them is important. And there's always, at Tier 2, refusing customers. Whatever product that you have, in their minds, I don't want whatever that you're selling. And third is just totally unexplored. So examples to this can actually come from, why anyone here plays Nintendo Wii? You got a small pocket right in the middle here that plays Wii. The thought process of Nintendo designing Nintendo Wii, right? So for those who are not too familiar with Nintendo Wii, it's designed to be a bit more family-oriented. The games, how it's played, and so forth, right? So when they cut across, they observe that normally console games, as they call it, is actually been played by normally young boys and playing a certain type of games. So their question is, why can't we get young girls to play also? Why can't we extend it to other family members? Why can't we extend it to father or family and make it a whole family affair? So they stretched the whole boundaries across and came up with a product that can cover across the board. That was actually the thought process of the creation of Nintendo Wii, to be able to capture that particular audience itself. Yeah. So again, it's just a thought process that kind of gets through. But I'm going to stop here and then open up to the floor. Because if anything, when we talk about all the various leadership or traits that is required as a leader within the digital era, is actually a whole series of things, but I narrowed down specifically for today's session to be able for you guys to have these 3 things as key takeaways. That in your next journey, or even in your current things that you're doing within your college's work or coursework, is to have some of these aspects in mind. And especially if you've got aspirations to be entrepreneurs and coming out with new products or services, these thought processes are really important, because otherwise you'll be another Me Too. You'll not be able to scale to whatever levels that you want to scale. You'll not be able to actually create the impact that you possibly desired if you do not understand well enough how you want to create value to the people that you're trying to impact, per se. But the reality is, I do believe that everyone on the floor this afternoon is actually, if anything, on the reverse. If I were to go back to the earlier slide, like I said, most of you guys are categorically digital native. If anything, I think from an understanding of technology, you are probably there, right? From being change-oriented, you're probably by DNA, yes, but probably lack tools to be able to support that process, which is what I shared just now, right? If anything else, the rest, which are generally fundamentals in leadership, is something that you probably got to continuously work on. But from a future workforce environment, I think that everyone here is pretty much primed to get to that point. So with that, I'll stop here for a moment and hand over back to Shafiq for the next block.
Thank you, Mr. Ashran. In his own words, doing something different is easy, but the true value in innovation is to reduce cost and increase value in the eyes of the consumer. Ladies and gentlemen, we open the floor for Q&A. Let us start from the gentleman in the pink shirt and the nice blazer over there in the center. Right. Yes.
All right. Test. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks for your talk. So I just wondered, sort of taking a step back, I wonder, well, one of the critiques of, everyone here is either going to a university or is already at a university.
Right.
And so we're all at academic institutions. And one of the frequent critiques of the academic institution is that it's actually quite far removed from the shifting realities of the digital age that you've described.
Right.
So, the tensions that quite a lot of students feel is that actually what the university wants them to do and the exams they need, the effort they need to put towards passing uni is actually quite different from what is sort of, they sense is necessary to really succeed in this shifting world. So I was wondering if you could comment on that contradiction, if at all you agree with it or not. I wonder if you have anything to say about like how you think we could navigate this sort of contradiction, in where we are in life right now. Thank you.
Thanks. Can I just narrow down a little bit? Can you give me one example of a contradiction that you were talking about?
All right. So I'm doing a PhD in education, and so we study different forms of assessment, and actually there are a lot of long-standing scientific critiques of the pen and paper exam. So we will study all these things in depth, and we'll study all the critiques of this to be tested on them at the end of the year in the form of an exam. Do you get what I mean? So we're actually taking the exam, writing about why exams are not good. So that's just like one example. I mean, I did my first degree in Utah, and I remember talking to my friend who was doing IT there, and he was saying, oh yeah, we're studying these things at IT, but actually they're completely like outdated. They're like 10 years ago stuff. Like I need to study these to pass my exams. And I don't think this is an indictment of that university. I think it's just the way academia works as a
Right.
whole. Yeah, and he just comes out, unlearns everything, does everything, side hustles, and learns the real stuff. So it's just, I hope that clarifies.
Oh, no, that does. Well, it's a tricky question in the sense that on one hand, I agree with you. And to some extent, it's an unfortunate reality, so to speak. Whatever you're describing just now. But at the same time, we are also moving in the world of an environment where the learning environment that we're in is supposed to change or is in the process of changing. But the reality is that we are in that time today where it has not changed yet, right? And fortunately or unfortunately, in order for you to kind of take that framing clearly enough, it will sound like it's double work. But for those of you that have gone through that journey, or like you, for instance, like one round within the degree level and now doing your next stage, it is going to end up being continuously still a double work. What the environment that's forcing you right now is just a working simulation environment that is getting you to practice real world working environment lah. That there will always be constraints, there will always be things that is not need that you will need to learn also outside on the environment. And even for me, usually the best of talents that we recruit within Dato would actually amplify that kind of a persona. That they do decently well within their studies, but it's also doing other things in parallel. I actually give you a very recent example. Last week, my other partner interviewed a new candidate that was supposed to join us, right? It was a final round interview, and that person on paper showed that he took 6 years to complete his degree. So my partner asked him, so why you took so long, right? And bear in mind, this is final stage interview. So he was candid enough to say, I actually disagree with how the exam system is done in the country. And because I disagree, I failed many times. And it took me a while in order to get that going through. right? He was very candid, he was very upfront, but because the other things that he was doing in parallel, right, impressed my partner, we're actually hiring him, right? We loved the fact that he had the guts to be able to say, I took long to complete my degree because I failed. Why did you fail? Because I disagreed with the system. But you can't just say that without any other things that you're doing on the side.
Yeah.
Right? If you just stop at that, then, we probably won't be hiring that person.
Yeah.
But he did other things on the side, and that's value. And I think organizations nowadays actually looks deeper than whatever that's within the qualification. The unfortunate reality is that you've got to do double work a little bit. Or, not that I'm encouraging you to take the path of the guy that we're about to recruit. But people are looking at different perspective. People don't want you to be too guided purely. They want you to be leaders in your own accord. And to me, the way he answered it and whatever it is, and how he wants to dictate how he moves his life, and how he has complemented it with things that he did, makes him a good leader on his own accord. Right? And those kind of things, if you get the right employee or the right company to work with, would value that far more than under normal circumstances, a traditional organization would have just put the guy aside because he just took too long to complete his degree. His grades were not super awesome, but the projects that he did was very interesting on the side. So I hope that addressed, I know it's not as straightforward, but it's also not too straightforward question, so to speak, in order to respond.
No, I think it's very clear. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I should say, actually, I'm not that critical of universities. I'm just putting forward
A perspective.
Yeah, an opposite perspective to make it clearer. Thank you.
No worries, thanks.
Thank you. We shall have the next question by the handsome gentleman over there. Please welcome.
Hi, my name is Ken Istiawan. I'm doing MBA in University
Ken,
of
is it?
Malaya. Yep, we met before. So it's really impressive to see how this fintech industry is growing fast in our region. But it's basically, there's so many key factors to drive this industry into forward size and capacity. But there's a big question about the future of the fintech in our region, is how to grow our industry to be bigger and significant and more important as Silicon Valley in US, and how to be the market leader in the global market, and what it takes, significant key factors to be the market leader itself. Thank you.
Was your question very specific to fintech or tech?
What does it take to key factors to be the market leader in the global market?
Market leader in, again, fintech? Did you say fintech just now? I just want to...
As you just mentioned now that you are in the database industry, which
Right.
is related in the fintech for now.
Well, it's fundamentally no different when you're talking about trying to make sure that you need to build a product that is acceptable globally, or even globally competitive itself. It's always, your root point is actually always ensuring that the product design is not just designed for the local market that you reside. And what I see is the fault normally within startups or entrepreneurs in particular, or individuals that have ideas, is that they may talk about the global market, but when they're designing the product, it gets hyper-local. There's pros and cons to that. You need to be very specific and focused, but at the same time, if you're not designing it for the global market, then you will not be able to get even funding support in order for you to carry your idea or even invest further in that particular idea itself. But if you're talking from what is needed to ensure that the ecosystem thrives and that Malaysia, I guess, will be as good as Silicon Valley and all those things, from a realistic point of view, it will probably require about 10 years plus minus, at the very least, simply because you need a wave of existing entrepreneurs to exit, cash out, and for them to actually come back into the market to reinvest in a different way. Even though right now in the market you've got venture capitalists, you got the typical high risk type of capital in the market, or if you guys are familiar with equity crowdfunding, but it's slightly different. So in the States, when you got, say, like Elon Musk, right, from the PayPal mafia, so to speak, when they exited, every one of them had quite a decent sum of money, and they were putting in money into ideas that were even raw in order to get further developed, per se. So I think Malaysia is en route to get there, but we'll probably be at an optimal level about 10 years down the road if you were comparing with Silicon Valley. But I also do think that as a country, we can't be too entirely dependent on government in order to help things get to that stage. It's the business, commercial, private sector drivers that needs to do that. And I'm talking from a person that was, had a short stint in government temporarily, and is able to see from both lenses. In order for us to put Malaysia to where we possibly imagine it to be, you've got to take it in your own hands, right? And drive that agenda forward and rally the support, be it from government or from other private sectors to get that through. So I hope that addresses your question a little bit just now. Good.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the thought-provoking question. We'll have another question from our friend over there, please.
Assalamualaikum and selamat petang to Encik Ashrani. My question is a general entrepreneurial kind of question. Okay, so it's focusing about the early stages of entrepreneurship. Means once you embark on an entrepreneurial journey, it's going to be tough at the start. Yeah. So that the question is specifically is how, as for Dato, how did you select the right people, the right talent, and who were they to you, when you started Dato? Yeah, so it's about HR related.
When you say how are they related to you, means how do I
get to know them? How did you come together?
Well, actually, so there's a couple of things, right? If you're going to start something new, rule number one is try not to do it alone. Some people rather do it alone than with other partners, but I'm a believer that if you've got about 3 to 4 partners, you'll be able to carry the weight a lot better. Number 2, it's really a factor of if you need to draw like-minded people who's passionate to solve the same challenges that you're trying to solve for your startup or your entrepreneurial venture, right? It's because you can't offer them awesome compensation packages. So it's entirely different than an established company trying to recruit best talents. The initial talents may not be the best talents if you talk to somebody from HR, right? If you talk to somebody that is recruiting people within the organization, it'll be an entirely different set of criteria. The set of criteria that you need is people that is aligned with the goal that you're trying to solve. And if you cannot find people that need, you're better off dragging that effect as opposed to just trying to get that partners on board to get things going. And it's very important to be able to get that through. But if within your circle of network, and I think the question alludes to basically, yeah, but none of my friends share similar thoughts of what I want to do, or feels, passionately about what I want to do, then the other way is actually to spend a lot of time into networking events that are contextualized within the space that you're doing or what you want to do. And it's just really meeting up with a lot of people that find that connectivity. It doesn't have to be somebody that you know before historically, right? It's got to be, your first step is alignment to the goal. Because at that early stage, you probably got no income. Everyone is putting their sweat and tears in order to come up with that first level prototype, for instance, right? So that passion on working together to come up to that first hurdle has got to be there. Second part is you ought to find somebody, while the passion is important, you ought to find somebody that is complementary in terms of your skill sets. If everyone is thinking the same way, it may not be too healthy also, right? And if you say at the early stage, I can't hire somebody, there's a lot of this online personality testings that you can use as your initial teaser. That kind of at least identify, this person is of this background, that complements me well enough. But what's more important is passion towards that, the time that the person's willing to put in to be able to drive that initial stage through. So that would be the starting point. And that's pretty much how, whether it's Datel or any of my previous ventures, it's like for Datel, it's people that I'm aware. It's been within the circle of networks before. They were further, but it got closer after that as we were talking about things. There were instances where it's a bit more remote, and but the reality is to find somebody is actually not as easy as people say. That's the reality, unfortunately. So mingle around if you got no one, and kind of hopefully you bump into somebody that kind of connects with you well enough. All right? Thanks.
Right, thank you for the question. We'll have one more for the lady over there. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Nurna. I'm a fourth-year medical student from IMU. So I have two questions. The first one, taking a step backward, I think that your model or framework can be used to sell people talent, to go across all customers. So my question would be revolving around, how do you sell yourself to people that might not need your talent or might not need your niche specialty? My second question would be, regarding all the frameworks, all the fintech development, is Malaysia ready for that kind of development? Because I do understand that this needs a lot of facility, especially technical experts. So are we really ready, or is just something that's very specialized and not accessible to everyone? Thank you.
We will be having one last question later. All right, from over there.
So first question, framework just now, whether it can be used to sell talent. So if you're from a medical background, I'm assuming not everybody may literally be looking for a medical talent. How can a medical background talent be appealing to other people? Right framing? Well, the thing is, if it's going to be your first job, right? A little bit of my explanation earlier on just now. The degree, to some extent, is not as important, especially if it's your first job. It helps, right? But it's the attitudinal aspect of that person and what the person kind of, or the individual kind of highlights within the journey of that person within the university itself. And like I gave the example of that individual just now that we were interviewing just last week. So you've got to, the only thing that you got to do, because a lot of people may not have that kind of a thinking, right? In your resume writing or in your letter, your cover letter that's complementing that, you've got to highlight that other traits that then overshadows your core degree background, so to speak, so that becomes a bit more visible. Kalau tidak, the normal mindset, unfortunately, of people would actually look at, I'm looking for a particular role, I am then looking at this. So if I take, you're from medical, but for some reason you love programming, and you've self-taught yourself programming, for instance. A progressive company will still look at you as a potential candidate. If you can show that your self-learned ability was pretty good. Your motivation drivers was pretty good in that sense. So that's responding to that first part of the question. The second part was, your question was in relations to fintech, right? Whether Malaysia is ready to embrace fintech. Would that be a fair question to Tony? So let me ask you this question first, right? When you say fintech, what comes to mind when you are asking that question? Fintech is financial tech, yeah? Yeah. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you say fintech?
A lot of data analysis, a lot of mobilizing businesses through technology. Yeah.
Okay. If I were to, so that's an interesting perspective if you ask me. My perspective when you say fintech is pretty much technology businesses that involves the financial sector. Your framing wasn't wrong, because in that space there are some niche areas that requires analytics and data based on their business model itself. But just for everyone's benefit, when we talk about fintech, it's actually any technology-based business that is. So GrabPay is categorically fintech because it's at the front end. But a fintech business actually has a very huge value chain. There are other back-end type of solutions also that applies. Now, but if I take that as a baseline, right, and respond to the question whether is Malaysia ready or not, I think Malaysia is ready or not needs to be answered from two framing. From a talent pool perspective, I think we've got decent talents to be able to embark in this space. From a market side, I think the fact that we've got two questions that stems from fintech, there is a lot of conversations that talks about fintech being something that's booming really well. Yeah, but to the question whether will Malaysia be a fintech hub or not, I think that's possibly questionable. And the question in terms of fintech per se needs to be narrowed down in terms of what aspect of the value chain of fintech specifically. If you see Fave, you're familiar with Fave, right? Yes, no? So a lot of platforms are having their own e-wallet, so to speak. Touch and Go has an e-wallet. So that's like one end of the spectrum for financial tech. You go to the other extreme, somebody running an insurance reverse auction type business, for instance. That's still fintech on that front. So there are many sub-verticals within fintech. But whether we can do well in it or not, depending on which niche that we want to look at. My lens is that not just within the fintech lens, anyone who wants to involve in technology and whatever it is should look within the ASEAN landscape and look at the commonalities of the ASEAN problem and then solve that problem, right? In Indonesia, for instance, fintech is awesome because it is able to make banks, so to speak, accessible to the non-bankable before, right? So there are many perspectives with regards to fintech, and I hope that addresses your question a little bit. If there's a little bit more, you can pull me aside afterwards, and I can try and address that a bit more deeper. Okay?
Great. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you so much. Let's have our last question from our friend over there. Please welcome. The mic is yours.
Right. Hello, my name is Nabil. I'm a mathematics student.
Oh, math student. Okay.
Yeah.
That was math. That was math, right? It's not medical, right? Okay.
Yeah. So I was about to ask a question on career advice, but now that we're on the subject of fintech, I have a question on fintech as well. Not fintech lah, industry trends in general. Okay. Businesses, if they know how to play their cards right, they can ride on industry trends and to their advantage. But sometimes these things backfire. For example, CIMB 2 years ago, they were excited to announce the launch of their fintech department. But 2 years later, the fintech department has been absorbed into a new department because it was a loss-making business. So my question is, how would businesses best leverage on industry trends so that they can use it to get rich?
Oh, Khazanah mesti sayang you macam ni. Well, what most companies do right now, and I think in the context that you gave just now with regards to CIMB and its fintech division, I think leadership within the organization needs to embrace two key things as we move forward. And I was trying to allude to this just now. As pace and trends of things are moving so fast and rapid, trends sometimes may do well or may not do well. But if you miss that wave, then you may lose the boat if the trend goes well enough, right? So what organizations, especially top leadership, needs to embrace is almost very close to a startup culture. And what most organizations are doing right now is they spin off on the side a unit or an entity that is able to be more agile. And it usually has a pretty direct link to the CEO. That agility is what is required. The mindset of that, if it fails, it is okay, will then move and pivot to the next wave that it needs to need. So it's no different than if you guys, not that I surf, but if you talk about surfing, right, it's about trying to catch that right wave. And sometimes you see surfers, swims out, waits for a while, and then, tries to catch the wave, and sometimes they still crash, but they still go back out again. So organizations need to have that DNA. And that DNA has got to trickle from the top, because if it doesn't trickle from the top, especially if it's a large organization, and your point of reference is CIMB, then it is difficult for anyone to make any changes at the bottom. The way forward, how organizations ought to be structured, is it ends up, while you can be as large as an organization, but it needs to look a bit more flat, where almost everyone is accessible to senior leadership. But senior leadership has got to first embrace that first, and then throws back that baton to the rest of the workforce in order to give that opportunity or a platform to be able to be accessible through. So that would be my lens in terms of how would organizations ride waves and so forth. Because if they're not open to the possibilities of failure, then no one within the workforce will take that leap of faith or that gamble or take that risk, so to speak. And the way forward is about being able to create an environment that employees feel safe enough for them to take that risk. And organizations need to actually take that framework, because if they don't do that, somebody else will eat their pie. And they can't just do this from upper levels of the organization. It needs to be something that is both bottom up and also top down in order for that to happen really well, essentially. All right?
So essentially, it's all about risk taking and risk management.
Yes. You've got to have that some level of risk appetite, so to speak. And if you read other materials, right, if I just kind of pull things back to the theme of the segment itself, when you talk about to be good leaders, right, in the digital age, all it just essentially means that you've got to be a little bit more entrepreneurial, even though you are within the organization. And that involves you being agile, adaptive, seeking out new information, and being a risk taker to some extent. But when you talk about being risk taking, you use the word risk management. Those two combinations are important, right? Taking risks doesn't mean you just jump into things blindly. But why most organizations also isolate either innovations unit or whatever that may be, is to ensure that agility can happen, but once that stabilizes a little bit, then it's able to pull that back into the mainstream of things. All right? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nabila.
Thank you, brother, for that last question. In this digital age, it is very important for us to have a lot of reflection in order for us to become a leader that is relevant. Thank you so much, Mr. Ashran. 1 hour is not enough. It has been a privilege for us to learn more from you about leadership and entrepreneurship. Everybody, please give a big round of applause for our very own Mr. Ashran. Thank you so much.